Om Asato Ma Sadagamaya Tamaso Maham Jyotirgamaya Mrityurmam Amritaham Gamaya Avir, Ahavir, Mairhi, Rudra, Yate, Dakshinam, Mukha, Te Namaham, Pahinityam. Om, lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness unto light. Lead us from death to immortality, and reach us through and through ourselves, and evermore protect us from ignorance by thy sweet, compassionate face. So my subject this morning is yoga and psychotherapy. And by yoga, I mean the Raja Yoga of the Rishi Patanjali. And by psychotherapy, I'm not referring to any particular school, but rather to Western applied psychology and clinical psychology in general. So we're talking about psychology, East and West. Each one of these methodologies is important and to be applied in one part of the spectrum of the growth of the self. Both are necessary, but each is great in its own place, and the duty of the one is not the duty of the other. And therefore, to understand this, we have to appreciate the difference between the two. Now we can start by visualizing. Give you a graphic organizer for our theme this morning. Think of a great mountain, and there's the mountain, and there's a deep valley. The valley goes up from the floor of the valley, goes up into the foothill plateaus, and then the trails wend their way up to the mountain peak. So we're going to be talking this morning about going from the valley up to the mountaintop. Talking about moving from the lower to the higher. From the lower truth to the higher truth. From the body to the mind to the soul to the spirit. From the gross to the subtle to the causal. From the lower vibration to the higher vibrations. Now you can picture to yourself two plateaus, or two landmarks, we can say, in this image. If we're standing on the valley floor, one landmark is the hilltop, the foothills. And the second landmark is the mountain peak. Standing on the plateau of the foothills is the self-actualized man. And seated at the top of the mountain is the self-realized yogi. The one represents the perfection of that's already inherent in man. The second represents the divinity that is already in man. So we're talking about first becoming fully human and then becoming fully divine, because that's our goal, to be fully human and fully divine. So let's begin here by looking here at Western psychology, which is generally speaking a study of personal development, all about the growth and the maturation and the change and the adaptation of the person as the psyche matures. There are, we could use a little integral theory here. We're talking here about there are multiple lines of development in our personal self. There's the bodily self, our feeling self, as we grow, as we mature, intellectual growth, interpersonal, emotional growth, moral growth. Each one of these lines of development has multiple stages. And the idea of growth is to move from one onward and upward from one stage to another. And the idea is that we move from the lower stage to a higher stage. We identify with that. We go around the cycle. We cycle around it. And we run the course. We learn our lessons at that stage. Then gradually we differentiate, transcend, and become established in a higher stage, including the lower. The self of the lower becomes the object of the self of the higher. This is a great spiral growth that goes on and on. Now, at every level of our psychological growth, we can have problems. And they may be problems of failing to identify with a particular stage of development. They may be problems of failing to differentiate, or failing to include that level from which we have already transcended. But at every level, we also, in addition to those problems, we also have people and resources to help us to work through those. We have our parents, we have our family and friends, we have our teachers and mentors of all sorts. We have psychologists and psychiatrists. And at some stage in our development, we reach the age of reason. And at that point, in the age of reason, we are, in the eyes of society, we're all grown up. And but we know that even though we may have crossed that threshold long ago, and we're in middle age, and we're in old age, that we're still not really grown up. And therefore, it would be good for us and helpful for us to take the benefit to go back to our earlier mentors in life and to get the benefits and help and advice from them in order to work through our problems. So this is the process of psychological. If we have a psychological problem, we could seek out a psychologist or a psychiatrist. Now, back in the early days of Western psychology, which is really a young science, didn't even begin until around 1850, and the people that we know about didn't appear till around the turn of the century, namely Dr. Sigmund Freud and Dr. Carl Jung. These are names that we all know. And these are the people really who kind of invented the language of psychology, discovered a lot of the basic concepts, and it's their terminology, it's their vocabulary that we use today to talk about this field. Now, this early field of psychology, which it began long ago. It's called depth psychology. And depth psychology means what? Well, in ancient times, that is in pre-scientific times, maybe back even in the days of the Greeks, they also had a kind of philosophical psychology. It wasn't scientific, but it was philosophical, and it was called maybe we could call it folk psychology. And their idea is that we look around, we see a mature man, a mature human being is someone who is a man. Well, man was defined as the rational animal. And the idea is that in the well-ordered psyche of Plato, for example, all of the different functions of the person are arranged in a hierarchy and are ruled by reason. Now we can contrast this view, this ancient view which lasted through the Middle Ages, to the view of the depth psychology, which gives us a radical different perspective on our own psyche. And they use the model of the iceberg. And you've seen the iceberg, pictures there of how just the tip of that iceberg is tipping above the surface of the ocean. You wouldn't suspect there's anything there, but you get back and you look down the undercarriage, you see a vast, almost the size of a mountain. All of that is hidden underneath. Similarly, they said that the rational psyche, that is the ego, the rational thinking mind, is just the tip of the iceberg. And that we think that we're making decisions and controlling our lives. Actually, our lives are influenced and determined by all of the hidden desires and intention and wishes and dreams and traumas and confusion of the unconscious. And all of this is beneath our awareness. We don't have any idea, we don't have any knowledge of what's happening. We're not conscious of it. And therefore, it's like, well, just like a ship has got to be wary of that deep under part of the iceberg. Similarly, we go through life and we're not aware of our unconscious mind. And therefore we have the term depth psychology. Depth psychology just means their method was to, using a variety of techniques, was to go down and enable you to access your unconscious and to bring things up from the unconscious into your awareness so that your own rational self, that you could deal with these and integrate them in a healthy way. Now, both Dr. Freud and Jung began at the earliest time working with patients that were considered to be like mentally ill. I mean, maybe they just had some neurosis, were living in denial of their feelings, maybe they had a lot of defense mechanisms, all the way up to people who were fully crazy. That is, maybe they were psychotic and out of touch with reality. These were the patients that they worked with. They were all people who had disordered minds. Now, there are two characteristics of a person with a disordered mind. One is that they're unhappy. Another one is that they're dysfunctional. They don't fit in very well with society. And their behavior may be bizarre or eccentric, and they're regarded as abnormal in some way. And so the goal of depth psychology was basically, I'm speaking very generally, was to take the patient and move them from the diagnosis of abnormal up into maybe normal. And that was considered to be success. If you could just make the patient more normal. But of course now we could ask, well, what do you mean by normal? And we look around us and we see that everybody's a little bit crazy. And yeah, that's true. But generally, if we look around too, we can see that generally speaking, people seem to be more or less happy. Now this is long ago now. It was a pop psychology book. Well, it was written by a professional psychotherapist. His name was Thomas Harris. The title of the book was "I'm Okay, You're Okay." Remember that book? Perfect definition for the goal of psychotherapy. If you can reach that, well, what great achievement. If I'm okay and you're okay, then everything's okay. So that's Western psychology, we could say, in a nutshell. Now you may say, well, yeah, but I mean, that's kind of, there are other schools of psychology that developed. There's behavioral psychology, there's humanistic psychology, and there's what is long ago now, but was called transpersonal psychology. We'll skip over all those. It's just more about personal development. And so let's take an example of the kind of an ideal person. Let's go back to the guy who is standing on the plateau of the foothills of the mountain. This is the self-actualized man. Now this man has he had problems in his early life, but now he's reached the age of maturity, maybe middle age. He's gone through a lot. He's come a long way. He's worked through a lot of his personal problems. Pretty much that's behind him now. He's found success in life. He has a family and friends. This is kind of like an idealized person. He has his career. Maybe he's eminently successful in his career. Maybe he's become very wealthy. Maybe, in fact, he has become a celebrity or a movie star. And he has name and fame and recognition. And now he lives in a beautiful house. Maybe he lives in a mansion with crystal chandeliers. And he has 2 cars and a boat. And he's traveled around the world. He's seen the sights of everywhere in the world. Now this guy is kind of like the Zen Buddhism. They give us the image of a man, just to visualize a man, who has climbed up to the top of a 50-foot flagpole. And there he's reached the top, success. Everyone is hears the applause of all those people who've seen his achievement. But as he's there, he's clinging to the top of that pole, a thought goes through his mind, now what? Now where do I go from here? What is left for me to achieve? I've already achieved the pinnacle of success. I've got as far as I can go. Now what's my purpose? What is it that will give meaning to my life? Now you can see these are not these questions, these are not personal problems he has. These are problems that are not psychological. These are existential problems. These are kind of issues that arise because we are human. And because we have reached a certain level of maturity in the growth of the psyche, he's asking himself these questions. And he's kind of, that image there is kind of symbolic, not just of one particular man, but we could say of the whole of collective humanity, of the whole collective consciousness of the Western world. Whole world which has achieved imminent great success in material and science and technology and the standard of living and material success have achieved great, highest success. And yet, still, people suffer from a sort of feeling of lack of direction, of lack of meaning and purpose. And in fact, they say that 90% of the people who are in the waiting room, waiting to see the psychiatrist, are not there because they have personal problems, interpersonal problems. They're really there because their lives are meaningless. Because they're searching for some higher purpose, some deeper significance in their life. And in fact, this was the observation of Dr. Carl Jung, where he says a famous quotation. I'll paraphrase it for you, where he says, in the last 30 years of my practice, I've consulted with people from all of the civilized countries of the world. And of them all who are over past middle age, maybe over the age of 35, of them all, there was not a single one whose problem was not in the end the want of a religious outlook on life. So that was his diagnosis, that what was wanting is a spiritual outlook on life. You remember the transpersonal psychologists are fond of a parable in the Christian Bible. In the book of Luke, there was a man who had a great estate. And he had fields and buildings and cattle, sheep, and herds of animals, a big farmhouse, a wife, and he had 2 sons. And one day he called his sons to him, and he said, when I die, all of this will be yours. This all will be your inheritance. And the elder son, hearing that, he was very well pleased, and he went back to work in the fields. But the younger son thought, and he said, I'd like to take my portion now. I don't want to remain here. He said, I want to go out and make my own way in the world. And so the father, he was so generous, he gave him his half of the inheritance. And the younger brother set off, and he left the farm, he left the country, journeyed over hill and dale. Until he came there, he saw the bright lights of the big city. Came down into that city, And he thought for himself, yes, well, let me enjoy myself a little bit. And he had his pockets were filled with money. And he was very generous. And very soon he had a few fast friends. And they would go out and travel around at night. And the younger brother, he would buy them wine, expensive champagne. And they would sing, and he would hire musicians to play for them, and they would dance the night away. And time passed that way. And soon that young man found that he himself had started to smoke and to drink and to gamble. And time passed, and one day he awoke, and he felt kind of burned out. He felt, all my money's I've wasted all my money. Most of it's gone. I don't feel very good. And I have a headache. I'm depressed. And he was thinking this way, and what he turns on the news, what does he hear? Well, there is a drought has come into that land. And everything's drying up. And there's no greening out of the fields. And all the businesses are closing down. And there's famine in the land. And the younger brother, well, he had to use whatever small money he had left to pay off his gambling debts. Now he had no money. He looked around. He couldn't find a job. He looked and looked. Finally, the only job that he could find was tending swine in a stockyard. And there he sat. He's cold and he's all alone. He's hungry. He's looking at those pigs eating from big bags of corn that are bought for them. Those pigs are eating better than I am. So like this, he's thinking, even the servants in my father's house are eating and so cared for, doing better than I am. Thought came into his eye, I will return to my father's house. So saying, he set off on a long journey. And on his journey, he was always thinking, what will happen? Will I be rejected? Will my father cast me away? Will I be able to find at least some food, maybe, or something? It's like this. He was worried of the anger of his father. But he looked along. He saw someone up ahead coming down the road. In fact, a man was coming towards him. And not only was he walking, he was running. And his arms were open wide. And it was the father. He said, oh, yes, son, welcome home, welcome, come with me. They went home, and they had a big feast. Welcomed home, the prodigal son had returned. You all remember that story. And that's kind of where that's kind of the cycle, right? We follow, we begin at the source. We fall from the source. We go through the trials and tribulations of our personal life. And then we come to the point where it comes into our mind, we have to return to the Father. It's time to return to the source. And this is where Indian psychology begins. So we talked about Western psychotherapy. Let's talk here about yoga psychology. We could call it, now we talked about depth psychology. Now we're going to talk about height psychology. We're talking about a little different perspective now. Yoga comes out of yoga psychology comes out of the framework of the Sankhya philosophy. The Sankhya philosophy if you haven't heard about it, you want to read about it in the complete works of Swami Vedarupananda. Very helpful for us to understand. It's not the same as Vedanta, but it's very helpful for us to understand the fundamental teachings of Vedanta philosophy. The Sankhya literally in Sanskrit means to count and to calculate things. And therefore in Sankhya, there's no appeal to scriptural authority. There's no, it's all reasonable and rational analysis. And the analysis is that there are 25 cosmic principles. But just to make it easy, we'll make it 2 principles. And that is there's nature and there is pure consciousness. Prakriti and Purusha. Nature here, they don't mean it's just the wilderness or the national parks. They mean the whole of the macrocosm, the gross, the subtle, and the causal levels, and the whole of the microcosm, your body, your mind. All this is included in nature. And nature is made up of Prakriti. Prakriti means stuff. It's just matter. It's just, it's all objective stuff. Over and apart from that is your own divine self, the witness consciousness. And it's called Raja Yoga because it begins with an idea about a Raja. Oh, I'm going too slow. Let's speed up a little bit. They talk about a Raja. The Raja goes with his retinue. His whole entourage. He goes to a theater. This is the analogy of Kapila, the founder of the Sankhya philosophy. And there the king, he sits down. Oh, the music begins, the curtain opens, and the dancing girls come on stage. The melodrama begins to unfold. The king, watching this, becomes mesmerized. He becomes spellbound. He becomes hypnotized, completely loses consciousness of himself. And so it is, there he is. He's completely immersed in nature. That is, this is the stage here. The actors on the stage represent the workings of nature. And the king, of course, is it's not a particular king. The king is a symbol of ourself. It's the symbol of the jiva, that is to say, the bound soul. That's our condition. Our condition is the condition of the king. We've completely forgotten our true nature, and we are determined and dependent upon nature. And the goal here of Raja Yoga is to become independent. It's called Kaivalya. This is the ultimate goal, to become enlightened. How can we do that? How are we going to get the king's attention away? Well, really, he's hypnotized. He really has to be dehypnotized. And this is Raja Yoga. This is I'm just taking it as an example. Principles hold true in all the yogas. The idea is to dehypnotize ourselves from nature and to gradually recall our true nature as the witness consciousness. We want to return to the source within us, that is the divinity within us. Now you may say, well, that doesn't sound much like psychology. It sounds more like religion. And you're right. Because what is religion? The etymology of the word religion, as you well know, religare, to link up again to the source. Which exactly, that's yoga. That's to yoking yourself again up to the source, your own source, which is your pure consciousness. So yeah, this is a kind of religion. This is a kind of religious philosophy, we could say. In fact, we could call it a form of Hindu mysticism. And so this is the purpose. Now, there are whole stages of this process. And the stages begin, of course, with that man on the hill, on the foothills. Now he becomes aware of his condition. And he begins to see, he looks around, he sees, oh, I know what I can do. He says, I can continue my journey. There's a road leads here up the mountain. And so he begins on the mountain path. And beginning on that mountain path, well, what is the beginning? As it starts there in Raja Yoga, as you well know, all the stages of yoga, beginning with being established in morality, in ethics, in moral virtues, and then in spiritual virtues, and then in the process here of discipline and self-control of the energies in the body. And by the fifth stage, I'm going through all the stages here of the great yoga of meditation. Fifth stage is called pratyahara. That's called renunciation. That means you have to withdraw your mind from nature, both external and internal. Unless you have, that's the kind of now we're at the pivoting point here, the essence of Raja Yoga. That's the essence, the characteristic defining feature of Raja. You hear a lot about meditation. This is real meditation. This is the original meditation. And this meditation is defined by withdrawal of the mind. Think of a man who is, I'm okay. Think of a man who is, he lives on the side of a lake. And one evening he gets up and he goes down to the lake. He gets in his rowboat, rows across the lake to the tavern on the other side. Ties up his boat, goes up there, drinks in the tavern all evening, all night. Closing time, he leaves there. He's completely drunk. He comes down to the edge of the lake, gets in his boat, and he begins to row. And he rows and he rows and he rows until pretty soon he becomes aware that, hey, it's getting light. The sun seems to be coming out. He's still in the same place. Then he realizes, he forgot to untie the boat. Basically, he's still where he's at. So, Raja Yoga. What is the psyche? Well, there's another dimension here to the Indian psyche, of course, which we don't hear much about. It's called the self. It's called the Purusha. It's called your own self-consciousness. The Purusha, I'm going to use the Sanskrit word here, Purusha, but we could call him yourself. Purusha is yourself. It's a witness. And what is a witness? You look out the window and you see an auto accident. You were the witness to the accident. But if you look down at your hands and feet, you don't say that you're the witness of your hands or of your feet. We're not used to talking like that. But the real pure consciousness within you, that is yourself, you are the witness of your hands and feet. You are the witness of your thoughts and feelings because that is your nature, is consciousness. Consciousness is separate from the body and the mind. And therefore the goal of yoga, of Raja Yoga, is if we want to manifest our full nature, then our nature's mind. Human being, 100% human, 100% divine. Now we have to complete the picture. Manifest the divinity within us. Divinity here means yourself, your own consciousness. Your consciousness, we could say, is comparable to a light. Think about the light in the theater where the king is at. He's watching what's going on stage. Meanwhile, there's a lamp in the theater which is illuminating everything. And the lamp illuminates all the people in the audience and illuminates all the activities on the stage. It touches intimately everything within the whole theater. But it's completely unattached. It doesn't see, it doesn't hear anything, it doesn't move, it doesn't act. It just is the witness. It just sheds light. It just is luminous. Similarly, it is with our consciousness. That's our true nature of our conscious self. That's the goal of this of yoga psychology, is to get our psyches in order. That is to say, ruled by our higher self, which is beyond reason, which is beyond thoughts and feelings, which is beyond nature. And so we have to gain control over our mind. The mind is compared in Indian psychology to a lake. And if you think of a lake, you see the wind is blowing, the rain is falling, Imagine how disturbed and that lake is. And we can't hardly see anything. As we look into the water, everything, all the reflections are fragmented and moving and shaking. And we can't make everything out, but if the wind dies down and the rain stops and the water becomes calm and placid, then that lake begins to reflect those trees and those flowers in the shore. And we can see very clearly what they are. Similarly, it is if we could calm our own minds. This is yoga psychology we're talking about now. Our goal is to calm our minds. Who's going to calm the mind? Well, that's our spiritual self. Has to take control over the mind, to calm the mind. And once the mind becomes like a mirror, then it will reflect things as they are. We'll see things as they are. But the goal here is not to see things as they really are. The goal is rather to take that mind, which has now become calm and placid and reflective, and to turn the mind towards yourself. And then the mind, like a mirror, reflects, turn towards your own face. You will reflect yourself, and you will realize your true nature. You'll be enlightened. You identify with the witness consciousness. So this is the goal of Raja Yoga, is enlightenment. Complete independence and freedom. And in Vedanta, that's called self-knowledge. That's called self-realization. So we can see there's our presentation, yoga, and Western applied psychology, psychotherapy. We see here that each one is a methodology that's applied to one part of the spectrum of self-development. Both are necessary for holistic growth, but each one is great in its own place. And we begin at wherever we're at. Even if we're in the floor of the valley, we're going to climb up to the foothills, become established in higher and higher levels, and the foothills begin our journey on the mountain path. And so today, here we are, and we've all come a long way. Maybe we're somewhere in the foothills. And our goal now is to get on the spiritual path and to realize our true self.
From illusion to truth and wisdom's sight, lead us from the darkness that fills up the night. Lead us from death to endless life, to your heart of love, to your eternal us through every veil that seems to hide your face, beyond our every ignorance, beyond both time and space. Give us strength and courage, through thy blessed
subject next Sunday is journey. And Swami Vedarupananda will speak. Om Dyo Ho Shantihi Antariksha Ham Shantihi Prithvi Hi Shantihi Apa Shantihi Oshadaya Shantihi Vanaspataya Shantihi Vishwe Deva Shantihi Brahma Shantihi Sarava Shantihi Shantireva Shantihi Sa Me Shantirehi Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. Om, peace is in heaven, peace is on the earth, peace is in the sky and in the waters. The herbs and plants and trees are full of peace. The gods are peaceful. May this eternal universal peace enter our souls and beings. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us all.